Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
One of the topics we've been talking about on this channel quite a bit is home equity theft. Home equity theft. That is where you owe some back taxes, and they foreclose on your home to get those back taxes. And you'd think, well, you owe $10,000 in back taxes. They foreclose on your home. They sell it at auction for $100,000. They should pay off those back taxes and cut you a check for $90,000, right? Oh no, they often keep the whole thing and say, well, when you abandoned your house, you gave up your right to the equity. And it's an absurd argument. And I remember the first time I heard about it, I was an attorney. And Michigan was one of the states that did this the worst. And a friend of mine said, did you know they do this? I'm like, they can't do that. That's so wrong. There's a statute in the books that said they could do that. And so just fairly recently, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You cannot do that. So what's weird is some states are continuing to do it by kind of contorting how they address it, saying, well, we're not quite doing exactly what the Supreme Court said we can't do. And so it's turned into a state-by-state battle where it's still happening. People go to court, and the court says, is there some reason you guys aren't following that Supreme Court ruling? And you can't do it anymore. You can't do it anymore. So I got a great note yesterday from Kate Pomeroy. She's with Pacific Legal, the Pacific Legal Foundation. They're doing great work on this as well. One of the organizations that's taking this on. And she said, hi, Steve. Today, the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled in favor of homeowners, recognizing that the government's seizure of more equity than necessary to satisfy property tax debts is unconstitutional. This decision, of course, follows the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Tyler versus Hennepin County, which determined that such practices violate the Fifth Amendment's takings clause, which seemed pretty obvious to most of us. The Nebraska court's decision mandates compensation for the excess equity taken from Fair and Nievin, who are the two parties there, reinforcing the protection of property rights for all homeowners in the state. So the full piece talks about how the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled in favor of Nebraska homeowners who are victims of legalized home equity theft, the unconstitutional scheme whereby the government takes more than what it is owed to satisfy property tax debts. We are thrilled that after years of litigation, Nebraska finally recognizes our clients' rights to their hard-earned equity, said Christina Martin, senior attorney at Pacific Legal. The Nebraska Supreme Court held that home equity is protected by the Constitution and that the government cannot take more than what it is owed. This is a great outcome for our clients and all homeowners in the state. Back in 2013, and again, that's how far back some of these cases stretch. In 2013, after Kevin Fair's late wife was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, he quit his job to take care of her at their Scottsbluff, Nebraska home. Shortly after, he fell behind in his property taxes, and the county sold a tax lien for the unpaid taxes to a private investor. So he owed $5,268 in back taxes. The house was worth about $60,000. However, he never saw any of that. Likewise, the other plaintiff lost her home in similar circumstances. So with help from Legal Aid of Nebraska, the two sued in state court to have Nebraska's home equity theft laws declared unconstitutional. Unfortunately, they lost their claims at the Nebraska Supreme Court. Shortly after, with the help of Pacific Legal, both asked the U.S. Supreme Court to end home equity theft in Nebraska. Last May, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Tyler versus Hennepin County, which is another case that Pacific Legal handled, that if the government takes more than what is owed to satisfy a property tax debt, it violates the Fifth Amendment's takings clause. After the Supreme Court decided Tyler, it granted Kevin's and Sandra's, the clients here, petitions and sent their cases back to Nebraska for the Supreme Court there to reconsider their claims in light of Tyler. In view of the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling, the Nebraska Supreme Court reevaluated the claims and ruled that they must be paid for the excess equity that remained after their property tax debt was satisfied. Court sent the cases back to the trial court to determine how much the homes are worth and thus how much compensation the two are owed. And just so you realize how convoluted this is, the guy lost his house at a tax auction in 2013. They took the money to pay the taxes, and he got nothing else. He did not get the equity back. So litigation ensued, went all the way to the Nebraska Supreme Court, and lost. Nebraska Supreme Court said you lose. And likewise, in Michigan, the courts here have been saying you lose. And then luckily, they got the U.S. Supreme Court to spin this thing around, Tyler versus Hennepin County. And now suddenly states are like, oh, we've got to follow that ruling? Oh, okay. So now the Nebraska Supreme Court said, okay, fine. We'll spin it around. It was wrong. They shouldn't have done that. So now they're sending it back down to the trial court where the guy started all those years ago. Now, he lost the House in 2013. I don't know when he filed the lawsuit. But the point is that it's still been quite some time. And of course, his house is gone. He doesn't get his house back. What's going to happen is they're going to calculate how much the house was worth and how much money he should have gotten. And someone's going to ask this. Yes, you can get prejudgment interest. So let's suppose the house got sold 8 years ago, okay? And he should have gotten $54,000. Well, his judgment can say he'll get the $54,000 plus interest that would have accrued starting from the date he should have gotten his money. They can do that also, okay? This decision sends a signal to other states that have not yet complied with the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Tyler that property owners' rights must be protected and that home equity theft is wrong. So the case is called Fair versus Continental Resources and Yevin versus Tax 106. So this is another great case. It's sad that people got to fight these because a lot of people, I think, assume that when the U.S. Supreme Court makes a ruling, all the lower courts, which is every single one of them, falls in line. But they don't. And it's not necessarily even the courts at this point. Sometimes it's the states. And so one of the videos I did recently was how the state of Michigan was still kind of doing this, but they were kind of like trying to say, well, we're not doing exactly the same thing that was happening there. And that's the thing, is that a lot of times people will try to distinguish cases and they'll go, well, Tyler versus Hennepin only applied on these facts, but it wouldn't have applied on these facts. And it turns out it would, and it did. And therefore, after a very, very long fight, these two will get some compensation. But again, I'd like to point out that when you file a lawsuit and you're suing the state or something like this, I'm pretty certain you got to foot your own legal bills. And so if Pacific Legal hadn't stepped in and handled these cases, these people probably would have been out of luck because an attorney might not be willing to take a case all the way up to the Supreme Court of the state and then back down and then have a trial and over some of these amounts of money. Now, $60,000 is a good amount of money, but I've seen some of these where the amount is less. And that, again, they're hoping that people won't fight this. So in case you're curious, Pacific Legal Foundation is a national nonprofit law firm that defends Americans threatened by government overreach and abuse. Since they were founded in 1973, they've challenged the government when it violates individual liberty and constitutional rights, with active cases right now in 34 states, plus D.C. They represent clients in state and federal courts. They've been in front of the U.S. Supreme Court 20 times, and they've won 18 of those. So trust me, getting in front of the U.S. Supreme Court is tough. Getting there and winning is tougher. And right now they're batting a very good average, 18 out of 20. So there you go. But Tyler versus Hennepin is an extremely important case. And it's the case that put an end, hypothetically, to home equity theft being done by the government in the name of back taxes. But it's going to take a while for the other states to realize that, yeah, the game's over. The game is over, so stop it. So again, from Pacific Legal, Kate Pomeroy sent this to me. Thank you very much. Nebraska Supreme Court rules in favor of homeowners in home equity theft cases. Questions, comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. That is all.